Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. We're just going to let everyone settle in before we begin our conversation today at CAAM's Digital Town Hall. Grateful for everyone to take a moment and join us in building upon the conversation here for advanced air mobility in the country of Canada. It is great to be back with our ecosystem again. We want to make sure that we just provide a quick touch point for everyone to gather and settle in for today's conversation. So as a quick warm-up question, we're going to have the CAAM team just drop into the question and answer function, a little discussion of where you're calling in from today. So let's get some of those digital spaces gathering on seeing some of the different locations that everyone's calling in from. So if you have a moment, please just let us know where you're calling in from today in the chat function there. And then as everyone's gathering, we'll make sure we can continue off. Excellent. Thanks so much, Danny. Great to have you here. Hi, Karen. Okay, Miami. Wonderful. Good. I see some Ottawas and Torontos there. Excellent. Beyond appreciated. Perfect. So as we begin, I'll start off with those initial introductions again. So my name is J.R. Hammond, and I'm privileged to serve as the Executive Director for Canadian Advanced Air Mobility, our industry association, and the federal not-for-profit that's been co-founded with the National Research Council of Canada. Alongside me, we have our CAAM team here, our Marketing Manager, David Dong, and our Chief of Staff, Theo Robson, who are supporting us behind the scenes. So first of all, thank you again for joining our quarterly CAAM Town Hall. This is your first stop shop for some of the advanced mobility updates in the country of Canada, focusing on the operations, policy, and regulatory aspects for AAM here across the country. We designed each of these town halls with that feature on being the key updates in the field of advanced air mobility from our national authorities as we progress towards the operations of this new industry and these technologies. Now, we know that 2024 at CAAM has been the launch of our second five-year plan, on operationalization. And as the national authoritative voice for AAM in Canada, we're helping to unify that industry together to identify the opportunities, the concerns, and critically the challenges as we spearhead our path towards operations in lockstep with our national authorities. So we're grateful to have you here today. And of course, we want to make sure we build upon the conversation throughout today's presentation. So as we begin, we do have to acknowledge that our work extends across the our digital event extends across the unceded and traditional territories of the countless First Nations across Canada. Specifically with September 31st coming around as a National Reflection Day, we invite collectively as settlers where we can recognize our duty and responsibility for the decolonization, reconciliation, and the equitable and inclusive use of our future air resources in this new industry. For today's conversation, we're going to be building upon three main aspects of our regular town hall settings. We're going to start off with a brief update from CAAM's side since our last gathering at our quarterly town hall. Then we'll transition it off to a Transport Canada segment, which will be focusing on some of those concurrent certification pathways of these new aircraft between both the United States on the FAA side, the European Union with EASA, and with our partners here at Transport Canada. We're then going to build it into the NAV Canada segment to give some of the updates provided by the RTM Trials Phase 2, which was announced over this past quarter. So as we begin, we want to make sure that we provide the insight by where the champions and golden stars are leading in our country. So we're very grateful that this CAAM Town Hall is powered by the support of YEG, Edmonton International Airport. And not only has Edmonton and the entire team at the airport been immense champions of this expanding advanced air mobility technology, their recent developments, which we're going to be excited to share more about and amplify, are help driving a lot of that operationalization towards advanced air mobility in the country. So grateful for them to be a powering supporter of today's session, and we'll give some more insight on some of the great work ongoing at that airport. So we want to make sure that we always set the base on where this definition of advanced air mobility is derived from. For us in the Canadian ecosystem, advanced air mobility is that evolution of the air transportation system enabled by new technologies from propulsion systems, aircraft architecture, and of course, our new operating missions. What that looks like in terms of specific operations is the variety of operating pillars that present themselves from the aviation ecosystem. We know we already have a great developed drone and RPAS network across the country that's been building since 2016. This is a critical piece that needs to be played into some of the retrofits of existing aircraft, as seen by Harbour Air's eBeaver that's been operating since 2019. And then expanding into the immense work coming out of the electric trainer aircraft space, one of the examples being the Sealand Flight Pipistrel Velas Electro, which had its first commercial flight this calendar year in 2024. And then, of course, understanding how that's flying into the new concepts and operating missions from some of the technologies in the eVTOL and CTOL space, as seen with the Beta ALIA 250, with expected timeframes of operations in Canada around that 2028 period. Now, these also need to support some of the more conceptual ones that are going to take a longer time before we see commercial operations here in Canada. And those are, for example, the autonomous eVTOL powered by Wisk Gen 6, looking around that 2030 timeframe for some of the larger cargo and passenger carrying operations. And of course, we have to ensure this plays into our larger commercial aviation play. And this is where we lean into the partnerships with the Boeings, the Airbus of the world, bringing some of that hydrogen concept into larger passenger and cargo carrying aircraft. And the important part, what we wanted to make understood across all of these evolving aviation ecosystem, is that all parts have a role to play in where advanced air mobility will continue across the country. Now, as said, this work cannot be done in silo. We at CAAM have a specific role in stitching together our existing Canadian aerospace ecosystem from all of our national, regional, municipal, and various industry association and advocacy groups, our skills and development ones, research and innovation, the three levels of government of both federal, provincial, municipal, and Indigenous, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion, en route to crafting the Canadian aerospace ecosystem and showcasing each role that these organizations and their members have in the future of advanced air mobility. All of that will then contribute to the partnerships we're establishing and representing Canada on the international scale, leveraging Montreal as the civil aviation capital of the world with the ICAOs, ACIs, and IATAs, and of course, amplifying them through the Dubai Air Show, Farnborough-Le Bourget, and the Singapore Air Show as well. Now, we're excited to build upon some of the conversation of the importance of our national board. So at CAAM, our national board provides us leadership, strategic direction, vision, and critically the governance to us as an organization, ensuring that alignment with CAAM's mission and objectives of expanding advanced air mobility operations in Canada. Now, since we've gathered last time, we've had two powerful new additions to our CAAM National Board, adding as leaders from both the National Research Council, Helijet, CAE, and Air Canada. So we are extremely grateful, as showcased in some of our press releases earlier this calendar year, to showcase our two new board members that we wanted to officially welcome on board, Kristen Bloguet from Beta Technologies and Michael Cardinal from Unither Bioelectronique, both who will be represented, but not only their golden star in leadership work from their organizations, but helping guide CAAM as an organization en route to the future of AAM operations in the country. So to give some insight on how our ecosystem is structured, starting with our national board as kind of that guidance and leadership, the national board is supported by the advisory committee, which sits right below them and acts as a reserve set of experts, helping to give ourselves, the national board, and the ecosystem strategic insight in their field of expertise. We then have our project partners and engaged members that can form the majority of our CAAM member ecosystem, and then the general ecosystem that contains all of the connection piece as we have an outreach program designed for our marketing campaigns. These are all stitched together under the operating pillars that we bring forth as how we operate as an organization. Focus specifically in the top right there with our thought leadership as our entry piece into the AAM ecosystem, building that through the different business connections under the ecosystem builder, forming projects through that project catalyzer piece, advising and giving insight to our national strategy team, displaying the great work at our national annual event, and then, of course, building our future diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce en route to operations in the country. One of the key aspects that we wanted to bring awareness to that has been relevant across our ecosystem and our operating pillars is the importance of what we've been able to establish here in Canada as one of the global firsts of bringing our ANSP NAV Canada, our CAA Transport Canada, and the industry voice of CAAM together under this national AM integration team. This is a group that we sit together in a quarterly closed-door meeting to start identifying those challenges, hurdles, and alignment with the industry en route to operationalization. That then gives us this platform here to communicate outwards in our quarterly town halls. We're also establishing some annual on-site visits for global leading OEMs and, of course, ANSPs across the continent. And what we want to intend is to make sure that this integration team also has an annual national AAM event that we're expanding, as shown by the ICAO Advanced Air Mobility Symposium 2 weeks ago in Montreal. One of the key pieces that we wanted to bring awareness to for our membership, though, is the importance of the communication up to the ministers here in Canada. So our key piece being that the CAAM project partners are participative in our quarterly letter, which will be an introduction letter to the new Transport Canada Minister, Minister Adnan, as well as the Minister Champagne from ISED. These quarterly letters highlight the key good news stories and challenges of the zero-emission aviation or the greater advanced air mobility industry in Canada. So this is also our invitation. We want to make sure that our CAAM membership can continue to expand and showcase where these good news stories and, of course, challenges can be communicated effectively via the CAAM ecosystem. So for us, joining the CAAM membership has a variety of benefits. Some of the ones that we wanted to make sure are aware to the organization and attendees, those priority reservations for funding at CAAM-led global trade delegations. We'll speak more about our Dubai AIRTAXI delegation that we're leading, and then similarly, the one to California in February of next year. In the top right, that participative voice in CAAM's policy and regulatory advocacy, be it via the letters to the ministers, as well as some of our quarterly closed-door meetings. And where we know we need immense work still across the Canadian ecosystem is that facilitated networking and access to CAAM's global ecosystem. So I'll make sure our CAAM team provides some of the insight of how you can become a CAAM member if you're not already one. The QR code is available here and will be available offline as well. But just an invitation to bring some of the awareness across the different opportunities to join and play an advocacy role in an organization. Now, as we wrap up for some of the key updates since our last gathering, we need to bring awareness to the importance of our key sponsor for today's event. We're grateful that Edmonton Airport has been our powered sponsor for today's town hall, and we wanted to bring awareness of why they were chosen to be the sponsored event. YEG Airport and Drone Delivery Canada launched their Phase 2 of their drone program this quarter, bringing the different medical aspects as a world's first with the Montana First Nations and showcasing how a drone RPAS operations can operate within a congested airspace and underneath the glide slope of the Edmonton International Airport. This is not only a nation's first for bringing the Montana First Nations and the medical clinic in the Leduc area to these operations, but showcasing some of the different developments that will have a massive ripple effect across the environmental, social, and economic impact this technology will have. We'll be providing more information in our CAAM quarterly town hall newsletter, The Pulse, but similarly, we'll show just a little insight of the video here, showcasing the impact that these drone operations and RPAS aspect will have on the country. So feel free to take a look. The key piece is that the over 3,000 flights are showcasing the amount of kilometers that are being flown for this specific operation, as starting here from the Edmonton airport, tracing along the rail line to the south. And what you'll notice when the drone departs from the existing location at the airport is there's a new control aspect to allow the drone to come to a holding pattern here, verify any arriving or departing aircraft at the Edmonton International Airport, and then continue on the mission after a safe pathway is developed. This has been a massive new technology that's shown in compliance with, of course, the Canadian airport regulations and helping to develop out how this can be applied in other airport and airspaces across the country. So we're grateful for the partnership with Edmonton International and how this will continue to have an impact on both our operations today and, of course, in the near future as well. The last piece that we wanted to make sure the ecosystem was updated on before we pass it on to our expert speakers here today is the awareness behind the great impact we've had at bringing the world together when CAAM partnered with the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, for the inaugural Global Harmonization of Advanced Air Mobility at the ICAO headquarters. Not only was this the largest event that ICAO had hosted in their history, representing around 1,700 attendees for the over 600 plus sessions and events both online and offline hosted, but also what that looked like for the 87 nation states represented. Similarly, this was the first time that the Whisk aircraft was presented on Canadian soil. So we're grateful to have some of the CEOs of the major AAM OEMs present to see this event. So there's just a little background information here that we'll make sure we can pass on in the conclusion of today's conversation. The next key piece I wanted to bring up was the awareness of our CAAM Canadian delegations. Our next one is going to be led in 2 weeks to the Dubai AIRTAXI World Congress. We have funding for 50% reimbursement via Canada Export, one of the grants that we retained as the national authority for AAM in Canada. So if there's any additional interest for attendees to be with us in Dubai, please reach out to the CAAM team. This is exclusive for any of our CAAM members to be a part of the Canadian delegation. The second one will be organized very shortly in February of next year, and this is going to be our OEM visit into the Southern California region. So in February, we're working with both Whisk, Joby, and Archer to bring the Canadian delegation down to visit both the manufacturing and the type test flight aspects of these three organizations, in conjunction with visiting Moffett Field, where NASA is focusing on a lot of their test operations for the organization. This will be exclusive for CAAM members, so if there's interest, please make sure you can provide some of the insight, and we'll start registering organizations as soon as this event concludes on that side. And now we can build it on to our first section of our insights from our experts here today. We're going to begin with our Transport Canada segment. So at this time, I'm going to have the chance to welcome the incredible Adam Bakos to join us on the stage. Adam is one of the project certification managers at Transport Canada and leading that champion voice behind the concurrent certification between Transport Canada, EASA, and the FAA, and is going to give us some of the insight on how we're going to do this as a nation on some of our existing agreements between the organizations. So, Adam, thanks so much for being with us here today.
Great, JR. Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be here and to share what's going on.
Wonderful. So the stage is yours, Adam. Please feel free. I'll take off my sharing and we can continue on with your expertise.
Great. Thank you. Can you, let's see. Can you see my screen okay?
You're perfect on that side, Adam.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. So good morning, everyone, or good day from wherever you are. I appreciate the opportunity, as I mentioned to JR. So today I'm going to take you through not necessarily a lengthy agenda, but there are a fair number of slides. Starting off, we're going to talk about Transport Canada's organizational structure. I'm sure you've seen it before, but it's a good refresher. Take you through international agreements and bilaterals. where they come from, how they are able to be in the Canadian framework, and then probably most importantly to today's discussion, talk about those concurrent certification validation activities with existing aircraft and what will come at the AAM and eVTOL space. Those slides are a little bit word heavy, so I'll apologize in advance, but I think we'll be able to have some good discussion about it. I'll also make reference to primarily the perspective of this will be Transport Canada, FAA and EASA, but we do have agreements with UKCAA and ANAC, and I do have a couple of slides on that. And then, of course, how you can reach out to us. So I'm sure you've seen this before, how Transport Canada is set up. Of course, we are a multimodal organization. There's not just aviation, but there's marine, road, and rail, headquarters in Ottawa. But there are 5 regions: Pacific in Vancouver, Prairie North region out of Winnipeg, Ontario region, which is out of Toronto, the Atlantic region, which is out of Moncton, and the Quebec region, which is in Dorval near the airport. There are, of course, many other Transport Canada centers, and Transport Canada does employ over 5,000 people across Canada. Probably most importantly for today, you're probably familiar with this slide, is kind of how the organization looks from the minister on down. There are 4 key groups. Looking at standards organization, national operations, the RPAS task force, and national aircraft certification, all working together, all working as one. I myself am part of the national aircraft certification branch under my chief John Derushi and Philippe Gassam as the director. But obviously integral to this are, the standards organization, which makes and establishes and regulates the rules that we will be doing to use these products, the rules that we will be using to do this work. So I think that was just a bit of a refresher, but I think it's good context to understand where we are today and how the organization is working together on it. To start us off, talking about international agreements and bilaterals, the question is always asked, well, why do we have international agreements? What is their purpose? We are looking at different parties with the goal of having common standards for airworthiness, environmental certification, and whether an approval is done in one state or another, it can be reciprocally accepted, and that work can be practical. And that's the basis on which the agreements that we have are set, and they help us to be able to do the work that we need to do. With the introduction of AAM products, that overarching principle concept will not change. Whether we're working with FAA or EASA or other countries, the goal is, of course, to always to help get that reciprocal acceptance and trust the work that Transport Canada is doing when we export a product, or we trust the certifying authorities coming into Canada as a validating authority. Why? What is it about foreign validation that is so important? Well, when we look at the structure of the aviation world today, there's a lot of interdependencies among regulatory agencies, and this non-exhaustive list that you see here are some of the benefits that are derived from working together and setting these agreements. So, for example, facilitating validation by the importing party, and that's including design changes. So after a product is certified, how do we then, when its design changes, how do we control that, and can those design changes be automatically accepted, or do they need to be reviewed by that foreign authority? The acceptance of aircraft maintenance and modifications, that's integral as well, because that's happening all of the time. So you want to make sure that doesn't matter where the product is from, that these activities can take place wherever it happens to be in the world. Of course, bilaterals, agreements, foreign validation, it's providing for international cooperation, and we all have a mutual interest in aviation safety and in making sure our products can come to market. When I say our, I mean, I guess I should say industry, not but the authorities, working for Transport Canada, we support that. The goal is to support the Canadian industry to get those products out there. Of course, international cooperation, that's a great part of these activities. Also harmonization and commonization of standards and procedures. If we know the rules we're playing by, if they're consistent, if we have similar standards, requirements, then a product that's built in country A, it can easily be certified or validated in foreign validated in country B, and that you have that confidence because everyone is playing by a common set of rules. The other thing is to recognize the authorities' competencies, and we'll see that later on when I go through the IPA with the US and the TIP with the EASA. And the other thing, and probably one of the most important things, is ensuring consistent interpretations. So consistent interpretations and applications of those rules. You don't want to have differences. There are differences sometimes, and they are sorted out, or authorities have particular differences that applicants will know ahead of time. But you don't want there to be that one interpretation is different from another for the same rule, because then that can cause confusion. So all of these together go towards the effort of standardization. Transport Canada has many arrangements, many agreements, a number of bilaterals. Of course, we're talking about FAA and EASA today, but with ANAC and UKCAA as well as with CAC. And the kind of overarching concept is to avoid the bureaucracy, eliminate the duplication of work, remove barriers, be efficient, and enable the authorities to focus on important areas, risk areas, and always enhance safety. From a Transport Canada perspective, Transport Canada doesn't require bilateral agreements to import or export products from Canada. Some authorities do, like the United States, and some other authorities. So that's good to know. That's good to know as well when you're dealing with Canada, for example. But that's not to say that, of course, you just make an application and everything's going to go through. There are a number of other steps too, which also I'll talk about in my concluding remarks. There are 5 main types of agreements. The one we're really going to be focusing today is the BASA, which is the IPA, the implementation procedures for airworthiness with the United States, and the technical implementation procedures, the TIP with EASA. But as you can see here, there are other arrangements ranging all the way down to even just at the maintenance level type of agreements. And over time, again, that comfort level, experience with the authorities, those can be elevated eventually into agreements like bilaterals, where we can talk about validation procedures and those kind of things, which help applicants understand what they would have to do when dealing with a foreign authority. You've probably seen this slide before as well, but to understand why a product can be foreign validated, at least, or why we have these bilaterals, it comes from the Canadian regulatory framework, the Aeronautics Act, which is at the top of that framework. The Act gives the minister certain powers, and one of them is to create regulations. Well, the regulations then in turn create standards and all the way down the pyramid. But we're primarily going to be focusing on the first couple of tiers today in the discussion, and kind of understand where this ability comes from. So an excerpt from the Aeronautics Act itself, you can see here that what I've highlighted is the ability for the minister to enter into arrangements with aeronautical authorities or governments of foreign states with respect to any matter relating to aeronautics. So because of that, we now have the ability to say, okay, we can now go out and have arrangements and the like. Supporting that, of course, as I said before, from our pyramid is regulations. So the key regulation in the Canadian framework is CAR 521. So that contains the procedures and requirements necessary to issue a Canadian design approval, as well as defining the privileges and responsibilities of a design approval holder. So that's in part 5, the airworthiness section. And this is really what, in brief, CAR 521 looks like. I've highlighted some key areas for our discussion today. In the general section, for example, you'll hear some key themes. That's where it talks about technical competency. When we get to type certification in Division 2, we're talking about certification basis and timeline for an application. Once a product goes into service, you're looking at changes to the type design, which are very important. And of course, any foreign product coming into Canada, Division 11 is important, validation of foreign aeronautical products. So the procedures you would need to follow. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers kind of at a high level. I originally had some wording prepared, but I think it was probably a little bit too much for the conversation. There are some word-heavy slides, like I said, so I took those out. But going back to the type certification division, when we're looking at a Canadian certification program, for example, we're talking about 3 to 5 years depending on the product. So for an engine, for example, is 3 years. Large transport category aircraft is 5 years. And when we go to an FAA and EASA validation, for example, we're talking about, yes, the same kind of timeline, but reduce or specified effort. And that's very important because when we talk about the bilaterals and eliminating duplication of work, so what it comes down to as well, are there specific requirements that an authority has? Is there certain risk areas that need to be discussed? Certain maybe additional technical considerations. So, things that Transport Canada has done, for example, that are, run of the mill, that stuff is not what's going to be reviewed. So that's why the scope of a validating authority is going to look at, like I said, maybe those risk areas. And conversely, if a product coming into Canada, we would exercise the same as well. And then we talk about other foreign validation programs. They can range anywhere from 1 to 16 months or even a little bit longer. But again, those are really going to be focused on potentially unique requirements, or it can be all the way from a paper exercise to focusing on very specific requirements that are from that authority. For context, in Canada, 1301-1 cold soak is a very common thing that's often discussed. FAA and EASA don't have that. So any product that's coming in here, that's one area of interest that Transport Canada would have. That's a difference. So that would be something that, would be a very specified effort for an aeronautical product being imported into Canada. So at large, this is really the Canadian certification process in, I guess, in a condensed format. I'm not going to go over every line item by any means, but it's important to understand that there are 4 phases for type certification. There's a 5th phase that isn't discussed as post-type certification design changes, which is that other division that I highlighted in the CAR 521 listing. But it's important to understand the work that is going in, that is involved with, if you're applying for a type certificate, some of the activities. So, and I said common themes throughout this presentation. There's going to be establishing of the certification basis, and technical competency, and that's really right at the beginning. Setting that cert basis, issue papers, application. And CAR 521, it tells you how to apply, how to go through the effort, what an application must contain. So that's all very important information to lead us down the path. When we get to phase 2, for example, that's when briefings are going to start, and that's when Transport Canada involvement is going to be determined in the Canadian product. Demonstration and recording of compliance, that's where you're looking at your first flight, your testing. If there is any involvement for Transport Canada, they would be involved there. And if you have issue papers, they're being addressed here, because those things all need to be closed by the time you reach phase 4 to certify that type design. And that will include any manuals, approved manuals, and the like. And of course, culminating in the issuance of your type certificate, or your TCDS, or type certificate data sheet, I should say, and not or. And it's important to see this because then we can relate it to the foreign validation process, which it's following the same phases, it's following the same steps. But again, now you're managing other authorities and you're doing technical briefings with other authorities, and they may have papers or CREs in the case of EASA, or in the case of EASA, you have OSD, operational suitability data. And that will be important to make sure that you're looking at all those things as you go through this process. And one thing I didn't mention on the Canadian process, but I'll mention here, and you see at the bottom, there are these phase gates that say, okay, yeah, we have conducted this, we're now can move on to the other phase. And there's no strict, cutoff. It does blend, but it's important to make sure that you are progressing, and that's when you have an initial type board meeting, and you have your intermediate type board meeting, and then you'll have a final type board meeting as well to show that yes, there is this progress, and you are getting done what needs to get done. And the foreign authorities like Transport Canada, they will need to close their issue papers and CREs. They will need to issue their give their approvals for the approved manuals, like airworthiness limitations and flight manuals, and that will culminate in the issuance of their type certificates and their TCDSs. So you can see the common thread between the two activities, but still following the same process. So what's important as part of these activities are bilateral arrangements. And the first one off here is kind of just a high-level view of the IPA, the implementation procedures for airworthiness with the United States. And the overarching principles is that Canada and the United States and their airworthiness authorities have a high degree of confidence and trust between each other. Okay, and the goal is to not duplicate work, as I said, to avoid as many as possible exclusive retention of findings of compliance, to lean on the certifying authority system, including the system of delegation, and mutual recognition of those systems. And that's very important, because if you have a DAO, and we might talk about that later, but when the technical competency reaches a certain level and you are able to, per AWM 505, obtain a DAO, then when something becomes delegated to Transport Canada, that delegation organization essentially can take credit for that. So that's part of that technical competency thing that I see in the AAM space that eventually will come with time, but is an evolution. And there we go. So that's essentially where we sit today. Revision 3 of the IPA with the United States, and similarly, we have an agreement with the EU. And we call it the TIP, the Technical Implementation Procedures. And again, the high-level concepts and principles, again, high degree of mutual confidence in each other, understanding each other's technical competency and regulatory abilities, and using each other's systems to the maximum extent possible. But again, where there are differences, they are known. Risk areas, those kind of things, they can be addressed and they can be worked on. It doesn't preclude an authority from doing the necessary work they feel that needs to be done, but it gives us a good basis on which to proceed, and having that trust in both sides to do the work that was done can have, in the case of Canada, focus on certain areas for a foreign validated product coming in from the EU. So I think what really is going to interest people is probably the next couple slides. Like I said, I apologize, they're a little bit word heavy, but I think it contains some important information. So I'm not going to speak from any particular OEM's perspective. It's going to be more generalities, but I think this is some key information. Understand the way it works today with some of the big OEMs that we have in Canada, and then what the AAM space can look at into the future. So we hear the term concurrent validation all the time, and yes, that you can call it that. That's true, but when I look at it more of a parallel versus sequential activity. Okay, and when we're doing a validation, we have to try to remember what we're trying to accomplish here. We're either trying to get the type design accepted, or there's a design change that we're trying to get accepted. There's the mutual trust between the authorities. So that's the basis on which we're working. So you're not going to do that unless you have a product that needs to be registered in a state, and that state requires that validation be completed. Some states don't require a product to be delivered to do a validation, but that is more of an exception rather than the rule. Most authorities won't do a validation because there is a cost associated with it, that they want to ensure that a citizen of that state jurisdiction is actually importing a product. That way, the taxpayers who are, that the government is expending money on, that they're doing work for a reason. Why would a company, an OEM, seek a foreign validation? And it really comes down to market-driven aspects. Their customers. There obviously is time, effort, and cost associated with it. So, it's not something you would just do as an OEM for the sake of doing. There has to be a kind of a logic to it. The other thing is, when I talk about cost and time, I'm not just talking about, some authorities actually are going to charge for some of that work. Some of them don't, but more so the organization itself has to employ people to take and do all that work to get that product into that jurisdiction. So usually the OEMs and different companies are going to have a team of individuals, whether it's an airworthiness organization or a certification safety group, that can support and process those activities to get that product into the foreign state. And really, in the end, the decision lies with the manufacturer on if they want to have a parallel or a sequential activity. There's nothing that says it has to be one way or the other. It is advantageous to do this parallel activity because if your market, for example, is, and if you're a Canadian OEM, for example, you're going to FAA or EASA, you want to have FAA and EASA with you all along the way so that work can be done sooner. And usually that's a 3 to 6 month lag time behind the certifying authorities' work. And of course, application and certification plan have to be accepted by the certifying authority before you can go on. Or if there is no customer, or if there is not foreseen a customer for some time, then sequential activity is okay too. But generally, it makes sense to have the authorities working together. Really comes down to what is the market and the other factors of time and cost. But when we specifically talk about the AAM and eVTOL world, they're going to have some of the same questions and same interests and same things that they're going to have to determine. It's a commercial decision. It's a monetary decision. Do we do it in parallel? Do we do it sequentially? Does it make sense if our primary market is Europe or the United States to have the authorities come in earlier? Earlier is better. It creates a team environment working together, so that really does help. But again, early in the AAM, cycle of activity, might not be able because maybe you don't have the workforce, or maybe because of the cost. It might not be seen as feasible right away. But there are benefits, of course, to have those closely aligned activities. And then with respect to other validation in other jurisdictions, those are usually done on a case-by-case basis, and there may or may not be bilateral in place, but that doesn't mean, again, that the activity can't be done. Some of the benefits of a parallel validation, for example, are setting things up front with those common goals, maximizing efficiency. But like I said, some of the biggest hurdles will be the readiness and eligibility to apply per the technical capability parts of CAR 521 and setting that certification basis. Important to note that the bilateral arrangements we have in place right now are product agnostic in relation to type certified products. However, in the AAM space, we are aware of the ongoing multilateral discussions, and roadmaps are being created and consensus being sought to harmonize requirements. The main objective, obviously, will remain to ensure product transferability across authorities. Authorities want to minimize divergence in approach as much as possible, and also understand that the AAM space, the technology continues to develop. So right now, I can't say that there's going to be bilateral level changes, but there definitely has to be consensus multilaterally first, and then if there need to be changes to make any reference to AAM and the bilaterals, then that would be done if necessary. My understanding is not all AAM are going to be type certified, and of course there needs to be some kind of framework in place to ensure those products can come into the country, even if they're not. Just a couple high-level notes about the ANAC IPA. It's very similar to the FAA IPA, and you'll see again common goals, and the UK tip as well, very similar to the EASA tip. So also very important now since Brexit. And again, same concept, same principles. So really, to close out, obviously there's a lot that has to happen in the AAM world. There's a lot of research going on. We encourage early engagement, discussing of high-risk areas. Key thing, have those certification basis discussions. Obviously, we're going to harmonize with our bilateral partners, but like I said, there's multilateral efforts going on right now first. The technical capability per CAR 521 and potential delegation under AWM 505 to have a DAO is also going to be something that will need to be looked at, and I would imagine would be a natural evolution in the AAM space. And of course, right now we're going to prioritize applications based on that technical capability, customer deliveries, and viability of the product to the market. All that is to say that when we look at bilateral arrangements and foreign validation, the authorities trust and cooperate with each other. We want to minimize duplication. We want to harmonize as much as possible. We trust in our authority partners, but where needed to have specific involvement, whether it's new and novel technology, to educate ourselves, to enhance safety. We want to respect the processes in place today, but we want to make sure that the OEMs can benefit from the greatest extent practicable the bilaterals that are in place, and we're always thinking about that. And lastly, how to contact us. You've probably seen this before. The email addresses. Adil Chaudhry, who I know has spoken here before, has provided his info, but I've added mine there as well. Always happy to have people reach out and talk about certification activities, and of course the AAM integration team's coordinates there as well. And that's really it for me. So thank you for the time and opportunity.
Powerful, Adam. Thank you for giving some of that oversight. And I just want to focus on that kind of key point that you were mentioning. And just to summarize this is, we know how to do this work in Canada. This has been done, and we can expand upon that for, yes, those new complexities coming in the advanced air mobility space, but there is an immense history of that concurrent. I'm going to pull your language of both that parallel and sequential aspect as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, there's no harm in using the word concurrent, but when an OEM kind of can decide if they want it to be parallel or sequential, obviously there are benefits, but again, it depends on the technical capability of the organization. Do they have the workforce? Because it is a lot of work to manage all the authorities at once, when you're trying to do a certification at the same time. But there are benefits, and that's why I made reference that as technical capability increases, these organizations grow, potentially they get DAOs, then they may have the infrastructure there to support those kind of activities.
That's it. And I know we have an immense amount of questions coming in. We won't have space to answer everything, so we'll make sure we provide those in an email later thereafter. But just as a summary on that side, Adam, to kind of bring us together, learning from all of the experience that Transport Canada has had in some of these concurrent validations, what is one insight you can give to industry on the AAM side that we need to be prepared for based upon the experience in past certifications?
I would say be proactive, be early. You can't necessarily, and that's you can't necessarily apply when you're not ready. That's not what I'm saying, because CAR 521 lays out when you can apply or what you need to do to apply, so that would dictate when you're ready. But when I look at the work that we do, when I look at the volume of work that we do, I think being proactive, identifying risk areas, communication, open lines of communication, the more the better. You know, as much as you can do up front, and be proactive, I think helps down the line.
Wonderful. Well, Adam, thank you so much again for giving that
Thank
perspective
you.
from the National Aircraft Certification side. Greatly
you.
appreciated. This kind of summarizes our key Transport Canada segment, which we want to hold on a quarterly basis. And now our second part of the conversation is bringing our NAV Canada segment. So I'm going to invite our next expert speaker from actually Transport Canada, who will be speaking, Josué Morissette, to the stage to give us some of the updates on the important next steps of what Canada is progressing on our RTM Phase 2 that was announced this past quarter. So Josué, thank you once again for being here and in partnership, of course, with our ANSP NAV Canada and helping to co-chair that, giving some of the insight behind this great work coming out of the RTM Phase 2. So I wanted to make sure that you're welcomed here on stage. We can see your presentation, and the stage is yours now. Oh, and just checking to make sure you've got your mute off.
There we go.
And
yeah,
you're
sorry
set
about
now.
that. Thanks, JR. As I was introduced, I'm Josué Morissette, part of Transport Canada, and working closely with NAV Canada on all the traffic management related issues for RPAS or drones. Within transport, I fall under the DG of civil aviation for safety, part of the RPAS task force. So today, my goal is to do an overview of, let's start with an overview of the Phase 1 trials that were concluded almost 2 years ago now, as a bit of a background for what we're trying to do with RTM, RPAS Traffic Management. We'll move on to an overview of Phase 2, and then with some plans and next steps for the next phases of RTM trials and RTM implementation. So what's RTM? So RPAS Traffic Management is essentially looking to develop a entirely digital, highly automated aircraft management system that is somewhat different from what we do today. Today, there's a lot of human involvement in the loop. So communication, there's still voice communication. There's a lot of pilot and controller interaction. So we're trying to perhaps change the way things are done, because we believe that's the only way to scale up operations, to increase efficiency, to increase the complexity of operations, especially at the type of environment that we're looking at. So low level, perhaps closer to cities, with a variety of different aircraft with different performance and different missions as well. And as the basis for any traffic management system, tracking, being able to locate, identify, and track aircraft is extremely important. And RTM will also introduce or make use of current concepts that have been developed specifically for RPAS, such as remote identification and other services that will be used to complete the RTM ecosystem. So a bit of background on RTM trial objectives. One of the main goals was to validate RTM technical solutions. So we know that the current equipment or technical solutions that are used for ATM, so air traffic management, has limits. So for example, aircrafts will rarely be closer than 2 to 3 miles apart for much of the operations. Obviously, we're looking at much closer spacings between a drone. We're talking perhaps a few thousand feet compared to 10,000 feet lateral separation or 1,000 feet vertical separation. So we know we're going to need new technologies to get there, and new means of communications, digital communications. We know that the CNS, so that's communication, navigation, and surveillance equipment coverage outside of major airports is quite limited in Canada. We don't have the same infrastructure that Europe and the US has, for example. So we're having to look at alternative technology, other solutions that can fill those gaps. And of course, with the goal is to have digital integration, mostly software-based means to do that traffic management. So the trials were meant to provide us with data to inform and develop different requirements for RTM services. With the trials, we also wanted to attract industry investment and perhaps attract interest in the space. And since 2019, we also have a group now named the RTM Advisory Committee, but it started with RTM Action Team, which develops certain concepts around services, around service providers, around other aspects of the RTM ecosystem, and the trials, we're looking to the trials to validate some of those concepts. So phase one. So phase one was launched in 2020. We received 16 applications, and we ended up selecting 2 participants that proposed a number of use cases and innovative technologies to be tested. Both participants were out from Alberta, and some of the criteria we used to select those 2 participants were based on the technical solutions that they're proposing. So are they bringing in new technologies? Are they looking to fill some of the gaps that we currently have in the CNS infrastructure? What kind of operations are they looking to try out? And does it have any commercial potential? And of course, in alignment with our RTM strategy that we had included as part of our call for proposals. So 2 participants, the first one was mostly operating out of the foremost UAS range, so that's just outside Calgary. And the main scope of their trial was to test a mobile ground radar for that surveillance piece, for the detection and tracking of drones, and also of traditional aircraft, using a remote ID for tracking on drones and combining that with current traditional aircraft tracking systems such as a transponder, as ADS-B, and the primary radar return of aircraft, and how they can manage all the flights using those different technologies. And all that was also done around a uncontrolled airport setting, so lower risk. There was really what we're looking at phase one is starting in a lower risk environment and learning from that. So phase one was really an exploratory phase of RTM trials. This is the first time that we were doing something like this in Canada. So we were looking to learn from a variety of situations and operations. The second one was centered mostly around long-range inspections north of Edmonton for things such as pipelines, railroads, perhaps roads and other applications that would also benefit from that use case. They were using a mix of ground-based and space-based technologies, so they were looking at providing the remote ID, so the tracking for drones through private, whether it was from a private cellular network or communication, satellite communication, to fill some of those gaps, and perhaps trying to have a more cost-effective deployment of surveillance technologies. They also used the current cell phone towers to add a piece of equipment that would detect traditional aircraft with transponders and ADS-B. So they were able to set up some of that equipment during the first phase one, and of course we learned quite a bit from what they've done. Some of the key findings on integrating RPAS into an RPAS traffic management system was that we're looking at much smaller aircraft, of course, and putting in a lot of equipment on a smaller aircraft can be somewhat challenging. We're talking about radios, we're talking about cellular device, we're looking at satellite communication device, the command and control. So there's quite a bit of electronic equipment on the small aircraft, which sometimes can interfere with each other. So that was from the aircraft side, it was a bit of a challenge to figure everything out. Of course, some of these equipment is likely required for operations in RTM ecosystem. So that we continue to learn on that aspect. So what we also found is the manufacturer expertise, the OEMs, wasn't always where we would have liked it to be, but we understand that it was a somewhat new space, and work needs to continue with the OEMs. And then some of the modules that would be required, for example, to switch between cellular, ground-based cellular, and perhaps satellite-based cellular communication, those modules didn't actually exist back then. Not sure if they do today, but we know that there's still a lot of work that needs to happen to not only come up with those different devices, but also make them smaller, more efficient, so that they can fit on the smaller aircraft. So that I like to use this picture just to show that the kind of work that they were looking. Again, these was trials. It was the first time that a lot of these things were being done. So there were a lot of innovation and outside the box thinking to make some of these things work. And hopefully, what we see here on the picture can be put into a device. The size of your typical small smartphone, so that we can eventually be able to integrate those into RPAS or RPA. Some of the other key findings that we found is that this is quite a complex space. There needs to be a robust test plan put together, and the group or the participants that are taking part need to have the expertise that's required. Our role at Transport Canada is not to act as consultants, it's more guidance and safety review and so on. So is sometimes a bit of a challenge to make sure that those groups had the right expertise. The other piece we found was that there needs to be a better understanding of what RTM is in the industry. So when we talk about air navigation services, there's really only one company or corporation that does that in Canada. So it's not unlike other industries in the aerospace. There isn't 3, 4, 5 big players that have that expertise. So I think the concept around what the service provision means is something that needed to be better explained, and we hope that through the publication of the RTM ConOps, that's something that's going to get better understood. But I think that's still something that we're going to have to continue to work on. So back to Sienna Solutions, we knew that after phase one, and obviously that wasn't a surprise, that it required further testing and a dedicated safety assurance approach. So whether or not all the equipment has to reach the certified level is sort of something we wanted to perhaps not overburden the industry with. So we have to identify, okay, what needs to be the certified level. Are there other pieces of the system that don't need to be quite, we don't need to be quite rigorous on technical approvals. So that those are things that we're still looking into. Performance metrics is something that we weren't necessarily able to provide right off the bat. There's something that we continue to work on just to see that to what level or what we need to see, what kind of data we need to see from the trial participant. Of course, aircraft RTM requirements still need to be explored. So what is needed of the aircraft to operate within an RTM environment? Is the safety assurance level that exists today sufficient, or do we need to be a little bit more demanding? Of course, the ultimate goal of RTM is full integration with traditional traffic. So when we look at drones operating somewhat close to airports and other aircraft, we want to make sure that those do so safely. And the last one was, again, needing to better define the roles and responsibilities of actors, the different RTM services, interactions, and the architecture which fed into the first edition of the RTM ConOps. So for phase 2, so obviously wanted to build on, we're looking to build on phase 1 rural trials. So the phase 1 trials were more, as I mentioned, in low-risk environments, so away from cities, away from population, away from current air traffic. So, but with phase 2 trials, we're looking to bring those drone operations a little bit closer to, suburban setting, so a bit closer to airports, increase the air risk that we're going to operate in. And we published a call for proposal for phase 2 trials around the same time that we published the first version of the RTM ConOps. So as part of phase 2, we're also looking to validate some of the concepts included in the ConOps. And some of those are concurrent use cases. So in phase 1, it was one aircraft, perhaps with one intruder, traditional aircraft, and that was about it. Those use cases were relatively simple, but now we're looking to increase the complexity in phase 2 with concurrent use cases and multiple service providers as well. And in RTM ConOps, we're also introducing RTM airspace concepts, so different airspace layers that would be put on top of the current airspace structure to enable RTM services and RTM operations. And the selection process was very similar to the phase 1. We used essentially the same criteria with, of course, a better understanding of each criteria, but the selection process did not change from the first phase. So for those who were at this quarterly meeting last time, I think Alan Chapman from NAV Canada showed this slide. So this is a bit of a reminder as to what we're looking at for the RTM ecosystem. So there's a high-level architecture, and the piece that we're focusing on for the RTM trials is the RTM service providers. So those green boxes, trying to understand what is needed to successfully deploy RTM services. Obviously, again, it's a new space. We in Canada, we have NAV Canada, who's sort of has a monopoly of air navigation services, but we're looking to open that up somewhat in the RTM space with industry service providers providing that interface between operators and the centralized system that NAV Canada is looking to have to manage the RPAS traffic operations. So RTM Trials Phase 2, the settings. So we're looking at RPAs up to 150 kilos. In the first phase, we were looking at perhaps simpler operations. So we tried to limit it to 25 kilos for simplicity of safety approvals. But now we're looking in line with what was proposed in CG1 for BV loss, looking up to 150 kilo RPAs. Like I mentioned, looking at suburban setting, adjacent but not inside controlled airspace. So we're still looking at that uncontrolled airspace piece. Still within the RTM environment of very low level airspace. So that's 400 feet AGL, perhaps a little bit higher if applicants are able to make that safety case. And again, multiple service providers, how that's being managed between service providers and eventually with the centralized system that NAV Canada will eventually host. So we had ended up selecting 3 participants for phase 2. The first one, Aerovision, is a group out in the East Coast that's looking to do some operations between mainland and some of the islands. One of the proponents that's part of that group is ANRA, which is a UAS or RPAS Traffic Management service provider that has a lot of experience throughout Europe and other places around the world. So we're excited to see what they can bring to the table and how far we can get with that trial. The second participant, Air Market out of Alberta, they were also part of phase 1. But they're looking to expand on what they did in the first phase to continue their concept of long-range inspections for pipelines and other use cases around the oil sands. And the third one, a variable pitch with Highlander as their service provider platform. They're looking at much more complex operations closer to cities inside restricted airspace. They proposed to set up operations inside the Niagara Falls CYR, which is a bit, the level of complexity is a bit beyond what we're ready to handle now, but we're hoping that in 18 to 24 months, that the groundwork will allow us to perhaps launch those trials in that complex airspace. So those were the 3 participants for phase 2, and that brings me to the end of my presentation. Questions?
Josué, thank you for giving that overview on our phase 2 RTM trials there, and just highlighting those 3 important participants that are going to be a part of this, the Aerovision, Air Market, and Variable Pitch, as some of the leaders on this next stage for our country and for the developments across the nation. So I know there's still some questions popping in there, but just to give some of the summary and then make sure we have some space for gathering those questions, give us an overview of where you see these timelines for phase 2 playing out. Do you expect it to take longer than our phase 1 for more of the increased complexities and learnings that we're expecting, or is this now going to be a more proven process?
So the timelines, the initial timelines that we have is over the next 2.5 years. We're hoping that all 3 participants are able to deliver their plan, what they've planned to do as part of the phase 2 trials. We're cognizant that the level of complexity is increasing quite a bit, so we'll see how far we can get for each of the participants and how much we can learn. But we know that in 2 to 3 years in the drone space, it's it's light years, right? Like I look at just 3 to 5 years ago, we're well beyond what we've learned quite a bit since then. So we're hoping we're able to contain it within the next, no more than 3 years, but we'll see where we get to.
That's it. And I think what I wanted to bring awareness for the ecosystem and where we have a lot of the CAAM members interested as well is leaning into all of the work coming out of the RTM and RPAS space is going to give us that critical scalability for some of the remotely piloted aircraft, both on the cargo side and of course on the passenger side. At some point in the future, we know our go-to-market strategy in Canada is on the piloted version, but these insights and learnings on how we have that next version of our airspace are going to be critical for Canada. So I guess my kind of favorite question, and I love just listening to Nav Canada and Alan, of course, as well, who you spoke about there. Where do you see some of the opportunities for the learnings coming out of this phase 2 that are going to help build a larger and more operational based RTM focus in the country? Are there new learnings that you're expecting, excited about, concerned about?
Yeah, we still have questions about the commercial potential of some of these things. We know that Canada, is, of course, is a very large country. We don't see the full-scale RTM being deployed from coast to coast. We know there's going to be specific areas where some of the services will be of interest to some, and perhaps specific to regions, specific to use cases. Whether we talked about the oil sands, but there's city centers where frequent delivery might be of more interest. We have other sectors where, whether it's forestry or other sort of natural resources, might be of interest. There's law enforcement that's also involved. So what we're excited to learn about is how do you put all that together into a safely, of course, but into an efficient way of operating.
Powerful, powerful. Well, I wanted to take a moment on behalf of the entire organization and CAAM ecosystem. Thank you for your work from Transport Canada side, and of course that partnership that you have co-chairing with Nav Canada on this next big phase for our country in leading this. So, Josué Morissette, merci. Thank you so much for taking some time and giving us some insight there.
Okay. Thanks, Jared. Thank you.
Wonderful. So just as we wrap up, I wanted to pass on the thanks again to both Adam and Josué for giving some of that insight. Our kind of next steps that we wanted to build upon from this conversation is we need your assistance as the CAAM ecosystem. Our number one call going out to attendees here today is join us in having this voice in Canada's AAM future. We're bringing together our experts, and we need to showcase the success of where the CAAM members are providing industry and government updates, as well as these opportunities to engage in our quarterly town halls. So please take a look at our next town hall that's going to be scheduled in December time to wrap us up for this calendar year. We will hold that space for Transport Canada as well as Nav Canada again for some of the most timely updates, and encourage our CAAM members to reach out to help give us insight of what voices and questions and concerns need to be addressed there. So once again, we want to say thank you to our speakers today, both Adam and Josué, for giving their time and insight for these important conversations, and similarly to our sponsor session powered by Edmonton International Airport for the developments occurring across the country. From all of us here, the CAAM team will be summarizing this in an email that will be going out momentarily with the call to action and some of the next steps, and of course, access to all of the material that will be on our CAAM YouTube channel before the end of today. And we want to say a thank you from our CAAM team of David, Theo, and myself for your time and participation today. Have a great one, everyone. Take care.